Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for making it here on such short notice. Really appreciate it. Earlier today, members of the media and the community were provided information about an incident that occurred during the course of an arrest nearly 1 year ago on May 3rd. Much of that information that was shared with you was blatantly inaccurate and just part of what occurred. Here today, I'm going to provide you with the facts, evidence, and give you the complete picture of what occurred 1 year ago, and then answer any questions that you may have. So the date and the time of the call was May 3rd, 2021, 11:42 p.m. Our officers conducted a traffic stop related to tinted windows and vehicle registration violations. The location of the vehicle violation was westbound Ashlan at the intersection with Willow. And to my right here, you'll see a photo of that location. And then the actual stop will be over here at 168, just west of, or on Ashlan, just west of 168. Then involved officers in this incident were 5 Clovis police officers and 1 Fresno County Sheriff's deputy. Their experience for the Clovis officers I can speak for were 18 months to 8 years as police officers. All the Clovis police officers were equipped with body-worn cameras, which were activated at the time of this incident. The force used during this incident were control holds, hand strikes, taser applications, and a canine application. The suspect in this case, Jamal Jones, he's a 28-year-old black male adult from Fresno. And his photo here is to my right. Jones' weapon, which was recovered from the vehicle at the scene, was a Glock Model 17 9mm, green and black with a mounted laser. It was loaded with 17 rounds of ammunition and had an illegal high-capacity magazine in it. It should be noted the firearm was reported stolen out of Fresno, and Jones was illegally in possession of it. To my right is a photograph of the handgun. Jones' history at the time of our officer's contact with him, he was known to be affiliated with a gang. He had a prior arrest history of resisting arrest, assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, brandishing of a weapon, and possession of stolen vehicle. The details of the traffic stop that occurred on May 3rd occurred 11:42 p.m. A field training officer, which was a K-9 unit, and his trainee were stopped in the number 2 lane of westbound Ashlan at Willow when they observed a vehicle in the number 1 lane of westbound Ashlan stop for a red light at Willow. The officers observed the front right passenger window had tint in violation of Vehicle Code Section 26708. Once the light turned green, the vehicle traveled westbound on Ashlan in the number 1 lane towards Winery. The officers got behind the vehicle and ran the license plate and discovered that the vehicle registration was suspended as of April 12th of 21. The officers initiated a traffic stop for the purpose of issuing a citation for these violations, and they activated their overhead lights at Ashlan Winery. The vehicle slowed to stop and passed several locations along Ashlan. While behind the vehicle, the officers were able to observe the driver moving around inside the vehicle, which is not typical and was concerning for the officers. The vehicle stopped on westbound Ashlan, west of Highway 168. The officers approached the vehicle, the field training officer on the driver's side, and the trainee on the passenger side of the vehicle. The trainee spoke to Mr. Jones, who was the sole occupant of the vehicle, and asked for his driver's license and vehicle information. They also informed him that he had been stopped for the tint on his windows. Mr. Jones said that he had recently purchased the vehicle and was planning on having the tint removed. While the trainee was speaking with Mr. Jones, the other officer that was at the driver's door noticed a large U-shaped tattoo on Jones' left hand, which based on his training experience is a common symbol for a well-known and violent street gang out of Fresno. The officer went back to their vehicle to complete a records check of Mr. Jones prior to issuing him his citation. The records check revealed that Mr. Jones had prior arrests for resisting arrest, assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, brandishing of a firearm or of a weapon, and possession of a stolen vehicle. With this information, the officers went back up to the vehicle to ask for additional paperwork. When Mr. Jones reached towards the glove box, the training officer who was on the driver's side noticed a handgun wedged between the driver's seat and the driver's door. He quickly and silently signaled to the other officers on the scene that he had observed a handgun in the vehicle next to Mr. Jones. The officers immediately gave Jones clear instructions so that they could safely take him into custody. Jones did not follow simple instructions and a struggle ensued. I'm going to show you the body cam footage of this incident. Please be aware that you may, if you're watching this video on the news conference or on a live stream, some might find this video that we're about to air disturbing.
How's it going, sir? Officer Plus Clovis PD.
How you doing, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. The reason I stopped you is because of your tent.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir. Actually, sir, I just bought the car like a few days ago, sir. I just got the tent was been on the car. I was just going to get the car took off tent tomorrow, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Right.
I got my license.
You have registration, proof of insurance?
Like I said, sir, I just got the car within I say like 4 days ago, sir. So I got all my paperwork and everything right here, sir. I got everything taken care of. I just came from the DMV on Friday, sir, so I got everything taken care of.
Where are you coming from tonight?
Right now, I'm coming from my brother's house right now, sir. I'm headed to the fucking house right now because my son, he needs to go to the hospital. He wasn't feeling good right now.
Okay, is there anything illegal in the vehicle?
No, sir, no, sir. I'm all right. I'm taken care of.
Okay, are you out for Gosher Pearl?
No, I'm not, sir. No, I'm not.
All right, just sit tight for me. I'll be right back.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So at this point, the officers walk back to their vehicle, run the records check, discover that information that I previously talked about, and at this point, they're gonna walk back towards Mr. Jones' vehicle. So I missed the pause there. So if we back that up, can you back that up, or I don't want to put you on the spot here. So what you'll see right here is the officer, this is the training officer that's back on the driver's side again. When Mr. Jones reaches over towards the glove box to provide that information to the other officer on the passenger side, he actually sees the handgun next to the driver's seat. And at that point, he'll reach up and you'll kind of see him motion to the other officers. There's a gun in the car and points down to where it's at, so they'll let them know.
Don't reach for it. Don't reach for it.
Do not reach for it.
You're gonna get shot if you reach for it, you understand?
As you can see here in the red box is actually where the handgun is. Just make sure we point that out so you can see it. So we're in tight quarters. We know the history of Mr. Jones. There's a handgun right here. And our officers are obviously want to ensure that they go home safe. So he immediately grabs a hold of his hand to make sure he can't reach for that gun, and they start giving him commands.
Lean back. Do not reach.
Don't reach for it.
You understand me? You understand me?
So what's going on? What's going on?
Just hold on for a minute. I'm telling you, don't reach. Undo your seatbelt, your right hand.
Your right
Listen,
hand.
right hand. Drop your phone.
I can't reach my seatbelt, sir. Like that's not my hand, sir.
You reach for it, you're gonna get shot. You
I'm
understand
not
me?
reaching for anything, sir. What are you talking about?
Step
Sir,
out.
I didn't
Face
do.
away
First of all, sir, I didn't do anything. You
Step
guys
out.
are
Yes, sir.
harassing me for no reason, sir. Like,
Don't reach. Stop reaching. You understand me?
Stop.
Oh, my fucking face!
Stop it.
Sir, the seatbelt on my face,
All
sir!
right, we'll get it off. Don't reach.
Sir, sir!
Stop
I'm not
it.
doing anything!
So I wanted to pause it here. There was an issue with the seatbelt. One of our officers actually got in the back seat of the car to disengage the seatbelt and found that the seatbelt was never latched. It was actually placed behind Mr. Jones' back. So when we discovered that, that was also a concern. I also stopped it here because I want to show you that Mr. Jones' arm is not complying. Mr. Jones is not putting his hands behind his back to allow us to handcuff him. He's actually pulling back and resisting during this time.
Sir,
Listen to me.
Sir, this guy, sir.
Stop
There's been a lot,
resisting.
sir, there's been a lot of stuff going on, sir.
Hey,
Y'all know y'all ain't got no business doing this,
Listen.
sir.
Stop resisting.
I'm not resisting, I'm not resisting, sir. Sir, I'm not resisting, sir. Sir, I'm not resisting.
Stop.
Sir.
I also want to stop it here to point out his feet at this moment. In the next few seconds, watching his feet actually pushing up off the ground towards the officers. He is not complying. He is not trying to get on the ground and place his hands behind his back.
Sir, I'm not resisting, sir.
Hold this.
Right there, what?
Hold this. Watch out. You're gonna get bit. Watch your leg. Get on your stomach now. Get on your stomach.
At that point, I wanted to pause it to show that Mr. Jones is still fighting. He's actually getting up at this point, trying to run away. We still have not searched him. We don't know if there's additional weapons on his person. This is all going on while you have 3 or 4 officers engaged with him. The canine applied to his leg, and he's still trying to get away.
Hey, come on. Help. On your stomach. Watch here. Take me around.
Sir, I'm down, sir.
Get your hand.
Sir, I'm down.
Could you pause right here? Shortly here in a second, you're gonna hear the handcuffs click. And when you hear that, the canine will be removed immediately. I just want to note that, to listen for that.
Sir, I'm down, sir. I'm down, sir. Sir, I'm down. I'm not resisting, I'm not moving. I'm not doing anything.
K921 to take a starting mess code 3 for a dog bite. I got it. Good girl.
So this next frame or next body cam angle is going to pick up exactly where the canine was disengaged from a different officer's perspective, because I want to point out medical aid was immediately requested when the canine was disengaged. The canine officer immediately called for EMS. And this next video, you're going to also see one of our officers within 2 minutes time render aid and start bandaging any injuries to Mr. Jones.
I didn't move, I didn't do shit. I haven't beat the fuck out of me, man. Come on, man.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hey, I'll grab that mid stuff.
You call my baby mom, because that's the only person I have right now, sir. You go right now, so they will be here, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Just a second.
You didn't get in the car, man. You didn't want to get out of the car.
I didn't ask you.
He did, several times.
Come on.
Yeah, that's fine.
You mind opening there real quick? Thanks.
Good?
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're just gonna.
I'm not a racist, but I'm not a racist, I'm not sparing nobody, I'm not being respectful, sir. I ain't got nothing on you, what?
So shortly hereafter, EMS arrives on scene and transports Jones to the Clovis Community Hospital for treatment. Mr. Jones was at the hospital for a little over 6 hours before being medically cleared and transported to the Fresno County Jail, where he was booked on the following charges: carrying a concealed firearm in a vehicle, possession of a firearm by a felon, carrying a loaded firearm by an active street gang member, a gang member carrying a concealed weapon, carrying a loaded firearm in a public place with special circumstances, carrying a loaded stolen firearm, prohibited from carrying ammunition, possession of stolen property, and resisting arrest. I will now open it up for questions.
Had any of the officers involved ever been investigated for prior use of force?
Based on Government Code Section 3300, that's not something that I would be able to provide to you at this time.
Can you tell us a little bit about whether this incident was reviewed and how it was determined that it was a reasonable use of force?
So I've watched every one of these videos completely through. On scene, there'll be a corporal that comes on scene who oversees our K-9 program, a sergeant that comes on scene that's actually was the sergeant of the K-9 unit at the time. Every use of force, a supervisor is responsible for coming on scene, interviewing the officers, trying to locate any additional witnesses, and then going to the hospital later, if that's where the person goes, or at the scene, and interviewing the actual person that force was used upon. Then they write a memo directly to me, letting me know that they've reviewed it and what their opinion is at that point. Then we have a use of force review board that later reviews any use of force, and that's made up of people from our arrest and control team, supervisors, administrators, and they all review the actual body cam footage to make sure we're doing everything the way we should. And if there's things that we need to learn or train to do better, we take those opportunities to get better as a department.
In terms of, you have 3 officers, the gun is removed from the car. So at what point is the decision to then get the K-9 if you are tasing the subject?
So they had 3 officers, and I can tell you most of those officers are pretty good sized officers. They're young, and they were having, everything they tried on him was having no effect. Any control holds, they were not able to control him. Taser applications, they were actually doing drive stun is what it's referred to when you actually put the taser on the person. That was having no effect. A sheriff's deputy that heard on the scanner that we were dealing with a combative subject that was actually in the area and came over to assist our officers. They tried strikes to his body and his head, and had no reaction. So the K-9 officer, because he's committing a felony crime, and because he's resisting officers, that falls under our policy for a K-9 application, chose to deploy his dog. And you'll see is once the dog was deployed, we were able to get his other hand from under his waistband behind him, and as soon as the cuffs went off, the dog came off. And we want to use the minimal force as possible. That's why you see verbal commands to control holds, to a taser and trying to escalate to keep it at the lowest level of force that we can use.
There was a lot of allegations made at the press conference this morning, including a comment by one of the officers talking about the suspect's color of his skin in the hospital the next couple of days. Can you clear up if that officer ever visited him in the hospital, and if you guys have investigated that at all?
There is body cam footage in the hospital when we go to do that statement I was talking about earlier with the supervisor. I've reviewed all the body cam footage. That statement was never said. I've never heard that statement, and I can tell you if that ever occurred at my department, the officer would be fired on the spot. That is not tolerated, and this is the first I've heard of that comment today.
How often are canines in your guys' department actually put out into, I don't know what the use is,
Deployed.
but yeah, deployed?
So on average over the last 3 years, it's anywhere from 6 to probably 800 deployments, and out of those deployments, 98% of the time we get a surrender is what we call. So the dog goes on scene and we're looking for the person to see the dog or hear the dog barking and to surrender. That's the goal behind, deploying the dog besides searching, or if we actually apply the dog. So 2% of the time in the last 3 years on average, we've actually, when the dog's deployed, has actually been used to bite somebody.
Chief, the suspect was under the influence of something, drugs or something at that time or not?
We don't have that information that he was under the influence of anything.
Did you guys do a toxology report?
We did not.
Considering he said he didn't even feel the bite and the taser was not using, does that fall in policy to not do a toxology report, or what was the decision behind that?
The officers at the scene didn't see any symptoms of intoxication or any symptoms to believe that he was under the influence of any type of narcotics, so they chose not to seek a blood draw to get toxicology done on him.
One of the charges from online says felon in possession of a firearm, but it says or drug user. So was there any criminal history that says that maybe he was a drug user, or is it just because of the gang affiliation and the previous arrest?
Yeah, everything I've reviewed in the reports is tied to either being in stolen possession of a stolen handgun or because of his gang affiliation or a prior convicted felon.
Any other ammunition found in the vehicle or any other handguns?
We didn't find any other weapons or items that would be illegal inside the weapon, or inside the vehicle, I'm sorry.
The gun was stolen or he owned it?
No, the gun was stolen. It was reported stolen out of Fresno.
Chief, we know, we're editors, we know that you guys can put whatever, but we didn't see the rest of the footage. Why isn't the rest of the footage being shown from the other angles?
When I sat there and watched it, it took me probably 5 to 6 hours to watch everything. That's just not something that we can sit here and do all day. So we wanted to hit the most important things that we thought that the community needed to see, and really to respond to some of the statements that were said earlier today that were completely inaccurate to what actually happened at the scene.
How many officers were wearing body cameras in that incident?
Every one of the Clovis officers, I can't speak for the sheriff's department, but I believe they're not issued body cam. So I think but everybody from Clovis Police Department had a body cam issued and it was activated.
So how many was that?
There was 5 officers on the scene.
What was the total length of time from the initial biting to when he received medical attention at the hospital?
At the hospital?
Yes.
I'd have to go back and look at that. From the time of the bite to the time that we rendered medical aid was less than 2 minutes. I don't know the time that he got transported to the hospital. I can't give you that time frame. I think it was about midnight he arrived at the hospital to a little after 06:50, Jim, is that right?
They went en route to the hospital at 12 minutes after midnight. Figure it's probably about a 10 to 15 minute drive from that location to the hospital.
So.
Chief, can you please talk about his criminal history a little bit more, elaborate on that, please?
The only thing I'm really, I guess, wanting to put out is what the officers knew at the time. So when the officers went up, contacted him, got his identification, came back to run him, the one officer, the senior officer, the training officer, noticed a tattoo and said, hey, that's a gang-related tattoo. I'm gonna run him to see if there's any other prior history. And that's when he found out, just to be accurate, make sure I say the right things here. The gang affiliation, the resisting arrest, prior arrest for that, assault with a deadly weapon, kidnapping, brandishing of a weapon, and possession of stolen vehicle. Not saying that's his entire criminal history, but that's what the officers discovered at that time, prior to going up and recontacting him at the car.
And the car was stolen, or you own the car?
The car was, my understanding is what I've heard from him and his significant other, was that they had purchased the vehicle 4 days prior, but had not transferred it into their name.
And Chief, it's standard when a suspect like this is taken to the hospital that the officers that were on scene with the two that made the initial stop, they stay with him throughout the stay until he's ready to be released to go to jail.
Yeah, for sure. Them, or we'll assign somebody. Typically, the K-9 officer, as part of their reporting, will go and do a K-9 interview of their deployment with the suspect, and the supervisor usually does that at the same time with their use of force statement. They'll get that at the same time typically, so we're not duplicating that. But usually, a supervisor, a K-9 handler if they're involved, and then the officer it's their case, or typically the officers that go to the hospital.
And you said the body cam stays on that entire time, so.
Well, it'll get turned off, and from driving over to there,
Right,
it gets activated at the hospital. But typically, a lot of that is HIPAA information that hospitals, we can't release that information. But some of that we can, if that was requested later, that's something we could probably, I guess, blur out certain things to provide everybody's protection.
But like you're saying, the conversations that they were having with the suspect.
Yeah, any conversations that I listened to all the video, and that conversation never took place on any body cam video that I saw. I've never heard that comment before in the last year. Nobody's ever filed a formal complaint with my department about this. We did look into it, I can tell you that. I've been well aware of this case. Both reviewed by the supervisor on scene, and then also reviewed later by our use of force review board, and then me personally reviewing all the videos.
So today was really the first time you heard that, even that allegation?
Absolutely.
And during that time where you were under the review of force and everything, were those officers on some administrative leave, or how does that work?
No, so if the supervisor that evening that's doing the initial review, if they see something that's a blatant violation of policy, those officers would be pulled off the street until we do our complete investigation. When it's determined by looking at it that it fits within policy, the force is within policy, those officers will stay on the street working as normal.
And how long have those officers been with your department?
So the one officer that was on the passenger side was actually on training at the time, so he was in the training process, and the person on the driver's side was his training officer. So for the 5 officers, it ranges from 18 months to 8 years if you did it as of today, what their training was. If you went back a year, the officer that was on training was probably 4 or 5 months at the time. And then I think it's still 8 years for the most senior officer on scene. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Chief, can you say what gang he was affiliated with?
U-Boy out of Fresno.
Chief, can you just sum up your response to the allegations that were made today in general after going through all this?
I just wanted to respond immediately. Our department and for our officers and our community, that we take every use of force seriously. If there was something that was done wrong a year ago, we would have dealt with it. But for somebody to come out and put out information in our community about our city and our department and the way we do business, and to be completely inaccurate, not talk about a firearm. It's pretty important that a firearm was in this case. To not say that we didn't provide medical aid, which you can see your officers are providing medical aid within 2 minutes. To say that the person spent minutes at the hospital when they're at the hospital for 6 hours. There's just numerous things that were said today or minimized that didn't really tell the complete story. So that's why we wanted to come out and be completely transparent and say this is what actually happened. So for the media that you guys know, and for our community that knows what actually occurred on this date.
Chief, do we know that the handgun which was recovered from the suspect's car was used in any kind of crimes?
I can't really speak to that right now. I've gotten some information that it could be possibly tied to some other cases, but I don't have the complete on that.
And is it a legal handgun or has it been modified?
It's illegal that it has a extended magazine in it that can hold more than 10 rounds, and it actually had 17 rounds in it. So in that capacity, it is illegal.
So even if somebody was registered with that gun, they still would have faced something for?
Yeah, you could be registered with that gun with a 10-round magazine and be legal, and if it wasn't stolen.
So he's gonna be facing 2 different charges, the stolen handgun and extended magazine, is that correct?
There's actually multiple, because he's a prior convicted felon. He can't possess a handgun because the handgun was stolen. There's a slew of 6 or 7 because he's a gang member that's in possession of a handgun. There's another charge associated with that. So there's multiple tied to the handgun along with the resisting arrest of the officers.
I just wanted to clarify, you said in the last 3 years, canines have been deployed how many times?
On average, so I can get you the exact stats. It's 600 to 800 times on average. So one year, I think in 18, it was like 600 up to 700 or 800 times. But on average, out of those, for all those years, 98% of the times they're deployed, only 2% of the time we actually bite. And I can get you those numbers to be exact, but that's, last time I looked at it, our deployments to bites is about 2%.
And in terms of, you know, for the common person watching this who doesn't know police policy, why is a canine officer deployed, in what circumstance?
It could be searching for, you know, I have he's not in here, as I say, my canine captain could really speak to this, but could be doing an article search if somebody threw a gun out and we need to go back and search for that. It could be searching for a person that's hiding from us. It could be for a purpose like this, where somebody's resisting, has committed a felony, or we believe it could have committed a felony and they're fighting with us. It could be used to, you know, gain compliance. A lot of times they're used to come on scene and people surrender. So we'll come to a door before we enter and put ourselves at risk. We'll make announcements, have the dog bark, and 90% of the time the person will come out and comply. And that's the dogs are used, honestly, 90% of the time, that's the function of the dog that gets used.
And is a deployment a specific term, like, is the dog considered deployed if he leaves the vehicle?
Deployed on a call, yeah, for some purpose that comes out, not just coming out for a community event or.
No, but I mean, like, if he pulls on scene this, and say it didn't escalate, the dog stays in the car, would that still be considered a deployment?
That's not a deployment.
Okay.
So like this officer actually is a canine handler. They were just out with his trainee conducting a traffic stop. Because he has a dog in his car, it's not considered a deployment. As soon as that dog comes out for some reason on that call, that's considered a deployment.
Chief, while we're on the canine, you made a point that when the dog heard the snap of the cuffs, that's when he released the bite.
No, I wanted you guys to hear when the cuffs went on, the handler immediately pulled the dog off.
Okay. Is that a key for a canine unit to release?
It's important to know that we were not trying to bite him excessively for some long period of time. We weren't trying to cause more damage or anything. As soon as he was secured in handcuffs, because that's the whole point, is to gain compliance and to get him into custody, the dog was removed. And I wanted you guys to pick up on that because there was a comment and something I saw that he was prone in handcuffs and we bit him with the canine, and that is not accurate. And I wanted you guys to be able to pick up on that he did not get into handcuffs, and when he did, we pulled the dog off of him. All right, well, thank you guys, appreciate it.